Creo que ahora sí, ahora estamos todos aquí. Muy bien.
Hi, I think we are all set. We've solved the technical problem that we had. Nancy basically helped us and saved us once more. Just give me a moment so we can get started. Can everyone hear me? Nancy, do you want to say hi to everyone or should I just get started? Hi, yeah, I think we can get started. I do want to welcome you, Diego, and I want to welcome Joan as well. He is a special guest for today. So now, Diego, you can have the floor and share with us a bit about intermediary liability. Diego, you have the floor. Hi, thank you, Nancy. Hi, dear friends and colleagues in Latin America and the Caribbean. I do want to make a couple of comments before we get started. First of all, we have simultaneous interpretation right now. And Sol, right now, our great interpreter, has already set the instructions in the chat for you. But it's really important that you choose one language and also mute original audio so that you can listen to the session in only one language. I also want to invite all of you to listen to the sound bites in SoundCloud because our dear friends are doing an amazing job of summarizing what we are doing every single day. And the link for the podcast will be there in the chat too, so you can find it over there. And once again, if you want to check the recording of the sessions of Monday, Tuesday, and for the entire week, you can visit our Internet Society website, Internet Society Latin America and the Caribbean. You can also check our live stream. And also, our friends from the staff will be sharing all the links as well. And then finally, as a quick reminder for you, this session is being recorded and we are going live in Facebook and in our live stream for the entirety of the internet. I think that's all for the admin work, and let's get started with the next session. Well, basically, I would say that I'm really happy about having this session because it's a continuation of the session we had on Monday about the internet way of networking. And let me tell you why I am happy about it in just a few seconds. As I told you on Monday, the Internet Impact Assessment Toolkit does have a case study based on how regulatory aspects and public policies applied to different internet intermediaries that we depend on to communicate with each other can have a positive or negative impact on the essential properties that guarantee that internet is open, secure, trustworthy, and global everywhere. So today we want to go a bit more in depth into that discussion. And actually, on Monday and yesterday, several of you talked about intermediaries and issues with intermediaries. So we can go in depth into this, talking to people who really know about this and about the relevance that this topic has for the internet. So we will start with a brief keynote from John Barada. He works in the WillMap of Stanford, and he will tell us a bit more about the history and the current state of intermediary liability. And then we will have a round table. Experts will be participating in it, and they will talk about a mapping that took about 6 months about regulatory landscape in several of the countries in our region. And we will be able to talk to these experts in the second part of our session. And then after that, we will tell you a bit more about this report about intermediary liability in the region. So without further ado, I do want to give the floor to Mr. Joan. He is a doctor in law of the University of Barcelona, and he is currently the czar of the global mapping on intermediary liability that is conducted and maintained by the University of Stanford, a space where you can find information about the regulatory landscape of the different countries of the world. I won't read his entire bio because it is very long, but I do want to draw attention to the fact that he is very proud of his son, and you have the rest of the information about him here in the slides, and you can share links as to his contacts in the chat. But now, John, we want to hear what you have to say about intermediary liability. You have the floor. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for your kind introduction too. I don't know if I can set up my video. I don't know if I could share it. What do you think? Uh, Even if I can't, thank you for the presentation. I think no one up to this date had ever called me a czar of anything, but I think there's always first time for everything. So thank you for that small excess in calling me a czar. Either way, it is a pleasure to be here this afternoon with you today in order to have this first discussion, especially considering the new agreement between Internet Society and Stanford University, especially the Policies Center. That basically works on developing the World Intermediary Liability Map. Now, let me very briefly summarize what we mean when we talk about intermediaries and intermediary liability. But even if I go very quickly now, I will be able to answer questions later on. So first of all, I think the first thing that we do need to remember when we talk about intermediary liability is that freedom of expression and the right to freedom of expression as a right that is protected universally by international law and also concretely by the Inter-American System of Human Rights is applied online and offline. That is, it is applied with relation to the activities and contents and traditional means of communication such as press, radio, and TV, but also for the internet. Um, and this is clear, of course, but there are several authoritarian countries that attempt to sustain that freedom of expression is only protected in terms of human right with regards to the means of communications that existed prior to the civil and political human rights treaties, right? But the United States Council has stated that freedom of expression is protected both online and offline. Nevertheless, when we talk about this with regards to the internet, this is not just about the fact that the freedom of expression that we have or the freedom to create content on the internet should not be unduly interfered upon by states, but also because when we talk about the internet, there is an added component that makes the debate, at least at the legal level, more complex, and that is the fact that we have intermediaries. Intermediaries are subjects who are not content creator, they are not authors, they are not the people who actually publish the content. They do carry out a fundamental task of being intermediaries and allow for that content to actually become accessible and be distributed to a large number of people. And what are intermediaries then? Well, intermediaries, I would say, are normally perceived as social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, and so on and so forth. But we have intermediaries of different nature, right? We have intermediaries who are much more technical, such as, for example, telecommunication operators, such as websites, such as web hosting services such as cloud services and so on and so forth. So there's a really big number of intermediaries. So some of them are strictly structural, and then some of them are carrying out a very intense management of content. And here we especially talk about web hosting services, such as Facebook or Twitter, because these particular platforms do act as intermediaries, but they also carry out a very important task to moderate that content. They regulate the content at the internal level of the platform, and evidently they are to be looked into with care. So right now, in the Commerce Commission in the Congress of the United States, a hearing is being carried out where the CEOs of the big tech companies are participating, and they are talking about how they moderate that content and up to which extent it is necessary for the current regulatory framework to be amended with regards to the way in which those platforms are moderating content. So then, what are the main regulations that we've historically had on this subject? What I would say is that the first regulation that we had was Act 230 of the United States. It is a regulation that came into existence last century, on the 20th century, at a time where evidently the way in which we use the internet was fully different to how we use it now. But Act 230 continues to be enforced, and it set principles that are fundamental. People believe that those are the 26 words that created the internet, actually. People say that about Act 230. And we understand that internet, as we understand it right now, was able to be developed thanks to Section 230. Now, Section 230 is very simple and states that platforms, as a general principle, are not liable neither with relation to the content provided by the intermediary. That is, those are not publication when there's a third party who is actually creating that content. So the platform, just by for the reason of distributing that content, cannot be considered to have any liability because of that content. And because of that, platforms are not liable either if they decide that that content in particular is objectionable, that it's inappropriate, and because of that they choose to take actions such as eliminate that content or make it less visible. So platforms are not responsible or liable for the content that they hold in their servers or for the content that they eliminate. So this, of course, is mentioned with regards to the legal security of platform. And because of that, we could say that they're acting as censors, because if they are not liable for either taking out or maintaining certain contents, they are not carrying out an access if they make a decision, because they're not liable for every single thing that they are distributing. Whereas if they were liable, they would be much more careful with the content that they have. And this happens because this is believed to safeguard the right to expression. So at the same time, they then have the ability to choose what it is that they do with the content that they have there in the sake of human right of freedom of expression. Then later on, a couple of years after that, there was a new law that was enacted. And it establishes electronic commerce, and establishes the principle that intermediary are not responsible for the content that they're publishing, in as much as they do not know that that content is illegal. And if they do know that the content is illegal, then they are not liable for it, as long as they diligently work to remove that content from their platforms. So there is a limited liability here in this case, because if there is an understanding that the content that they are sharing is illegal and they do not diligently delete that content, they are liable. And then on the other hand, there is a prohibition that is established where the platforms are not obligated to monitor the entirety of the content that they distribute. So they are not actually required to constantly monitor the entirety of the content that they're facilitating to the population in order to verify that no illegal content has snuck into their offer, if you will. So this is the general framework. Then we have other similar frameworks. For example, in the case of India, there was a court ruling of the Supreme Court in India that led to a certain number of regulations that would create exemptions for the liability of intermediaries. In Latin America, because of jurisprudence, we have cases in Colombia and Argentina, certain pronouncings that go and rulings that go in that line. But then, with regards to international standards, we have the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights that establishes the importance of guaranteeing that intermediaries are not liable, at least in an objective way, with regards to the contents that they are facilitating. Now, this framework, and in this framework, of course, we can talk about what's happening in the United States, is undergoing a crisis. And what seems clear to all of us is that the legislation, both in the United States and in Europe, as we know it, will enter a process of transformation. In the United States, what seems to be real is that whoever wins the election will have a hand in Section 230. And we know that right now we're going through a process of discussion with regards to the ruling in the area of commerce. So does that mean that we will radically see a change in the exemptions of liability for intermediaries? Well, I would say no, but I would also say that there is this motto that is rising, if you will, or this slogan that is rising, that platforms must do more for the sake of the elimination of undesirable content. And everything seems to show us that the road that we are laying, that we see ahead, will be about not setting a direct obligation to deal with illegal content or with the elimination of all content, but at least to a certain extent, it will be required for platforms to have mechanisms that can facilitate the elimination of undesirable or objectionable content. So maybe we will see the obligation to have mechanisms that will allow for a quick reporting by users on content that is objectionable or inappropriate. The fact that when certain inappropriate content is flagged and they need to act in an expeditious way, well, that will probably be a necessity. Or maybe they might be asked to have quick coordination mechanisms with authorities so that when they are required to provide certain information to the authorities, they can do that in a diligent way, et cetera, of course. So perhaps we're talking about the due diligence, if you will, that these platforms might have, which doesn't necessarily imply that they would have to regulate content in a different way. And I believe that it would be undesirable for them to have to do that because of freedom of expression, but at least to a certain extent for them to have structural obligations, if you will, certain obligations or at least certain mechanisms in place to allow for them to more efficiently deal with the content that is being provided. And of course, the discussion can move into different sectors and areas, right? Because are we talking about illegal content, or are we talking about content that, even if it's not illegal, might be objectionable in the context of a democratic society? Because if we talk about misinformation is protected by the freedom of speech rights, right? but the state might want to impose upon platforms for them to delete certain content that is not illegal but might be misinformation. So there is a debate right now with regards to the kinds of contents that, from the regulatory point of view, might be forced into deletion. This is a debate that of course, we are living right now in the United States, in Latin America, and in Europe as well. This debate is being carried out in several countries. And it is also true that in many countries, unfortunately, where we have our regulations that are very authoritarian, and they deal in an authoritarian way with platforms, and they place the entire liability on the platforms and tell them that they should monitor the entire content, especially if it criticizes the government in office, or the president who is in office in Latin America in particular. But I would say that generally speaking, we're going through very interesting times, because I think that many of the legal certainties and principles that have been in place and enforced for the past 20 years, especially in the United States, I will say, and in the European Union, are now being reconsidered and undergoing change. So I do think that we are going through a process that we need to monitor. And I think it relates not just to intermediary platforms such as Facebook and Twitter, but just in relation with intermediaries that are working in the layer of infrastructure, because there might be this desire, this temptation to also impose certain due diligence requirements and monitoring requirements to that kind of intermediaries as well. So that's what I would say about the big issues that we're facing right now. But the second thing that I did want to explain today is that we now have this world intermediary liability map, that I might provide you the link later on if you want to see it. This is an initiative that was created by the Center for Internet and Society of the Stanford Law School. And in summary, the intention or the objective of this map is basically to compile in a map that is set up in a platform that is open to all experts and all interested parties, showing the different regions in the country, and it presents all the regulations, all the court rulings, and so on and so forth, that might have a certain impact on intermediary liability, on the way in which platforms are being forced to carry out their activities, and of course, the impact that that might eventually have on freedom of expression. This is a project that we started conducting a couple of years ago. Evidently, it is very ambitious for us to try to monitor every country in the world. And of course, up to this date, there are countries that remain under our radar, if you will, because we need to have experts in several parts of the world who would explain and help us in the process as these regulations were coming into place, or as these rulings were being updated in order to pour them into the map. But we have conducted very thorough work, at least with regards to part of the countries of Latin America. Although I think we need to continue working there, and there are several aspects that must be updated, of course. And in the context of this collaboration between Internet Society and the University of Stanford, we were able to at least start having a conversation about to how we can use resources that already exist, or with experts that already know quite a lot about the legislation in different countries, in order for us to have a fully updated map. Either way, what I would say is that what I invite you guys to do is to check out that map, visit the website, see how the map work, see all the countries countries that we've already surveyed, what the information that we've compiled is, so that after there we could explore all together how we can improve that map, at least with regards to Latin America, where a lot of things are happening right now. Because I would say the debate is not just in the United States, this is not just a European Union debate. This debate is happening everywhere in the world, and it provides an opportunity for people in the rest of the world to find creative solutions, especially in the southeast of Asia and especially in Latin America and the Caribbean. So that would be a very, very brief, very quick, an 18-minute summary, if you will, of what I wanted to explain to you. But like I said, I am here for you if you have any questions. Thank you. Thank you, Joan, for this summary of the topic. I would say that because of what you explained, we can then move on to this roundtable, especially with the participation of our experts in the region. There are several things that we can talk about here, and please, if you all have questions, write them there in the chat or in the Q&A so we can share them with our experts in the region. And I would like for all the people who participated in the intermediary liability survey to turn on their cameras so that we can start working on this round table. Because between February and July of this year, we worked together with several experts of the region to create this mapping, this intermediary liability survey of the countries of a region. There are 8 country profiles here in the survey. And what we're going to be doing now is just start this round table based on what Joan was saying. That will be moderated by Viviana Silva Macedo, who actually created the profile for Venezuela. But we have our friends from Bolivia, Chile, Brazil, Colombia, and there are other ones, but I don't remember which countries they were from. And Joan is also part of the roundtable, so we can very freely, openly talk about intermediary liability from a global and regional perspective. So Viviana, you have the floor to start moderating the roundtable. Hi, Diego. Hi, everyone. Well, Diego, some people are saying that they can't turn on their cameras. The same thing happened for me, as a matter of fact. So while we get started, Nancy, do you know what's going on? Wait, I'm gonna make them co-host to see if they can turn on their cameras. Okay, but it's okay. As long as we can all speak, I think that we can get started, right? Okay, so as Diego was saying, what we want mostly is just for us to start having a conversation where we can analyze not just what Joan said, but also consider what you, as participants of every single country, consider to be relevant in order for us to discuss here in the round table. First, we will give each participant about 2 minutes, and please make sure that you make proper use of that time to very briefly present the aspects that you consider to be interesting, for you to very briefly present yourselves as well, and for you to mention 2 aspects that you would like to point out about the presentation shared by Juan. In my case, I participated in the creation of the Venezuela profile. It is really hard, perhaps, to map out the intermediary liability regulatory landscape because of the political and financial situation of the country. And this is, of course, I think, connected to what Joan was saying, because we are one of the countries that, because of the political mechanisms in the country, cannot really work on the regulatory landscape, and most of our legislation is very much focused on political interests in our country and not in the interest of users. Now, I will give the floor to every single one of you. I think we can get started with Roberto Zambrana from Bolivia. Roberto, are you here with us? Yes, I'm here. Hi, Viviana. How are you? It is a pleasure to say hi to you and Diego and to welcome everyone who is here with us this afternoon. And so, very, very quickly, to give a space to everyone, I just want to very generally say a couple of things about the presentation of Joan. But before those comments, just to tell you a bit about the situation in Bolivia, I think we go in the same direction as Venezuela. We have several regulations. I think the most recent one is the telecommunications law in 2018 that set up certain regulations, but they're quite general for the telecommunications sector, but specifically with regards to intermediary liability, especially when we're talking about filtering content development or the filtering of illegal content. There are really no particular rulings or a real legal framework that would demand intermediaries to delete content or carry out any actions whatsoever. I would say that there are certain aspects that are important that I do want to mention, that they have to do with what we can do as members of the government in order to sanction the intermediaries when they are not located in the country. But I will talk about this later on. So now maybe Fabian can say a bit more about this. Hi, thank you, Roberto, and thank you to everyone here. If we talk about the legal aspect, because you were telling us that we should consider two things, I would say the first thing is that there's this incompatibility to match the Anglo-Saxon system, because the Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence is very different from ours. And then the second thing is that there's something that happens in Bolivia is that regulations are rather are dispersed. We don't have seven regulatory bodies, if you will, but we have a multitude of regulations that create roadblocks for us. So that's it for my time. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we can move on to Brazil now. Joanna, are you here with us?
Hi. First, I would like to apologize because I'm not going to speak Spanish because actually I don't know how to speak Spanish. So I truly apologize for you guys. But anyways, let me start in my 1 minute. First, differently of what my colleagues just said, here in Brazil, we have the Brazilian Civil Rights Framework, what we call Marco Civil of Internet. That was the first law in the country that set the ground for ensuring civil rights and attribute rights and responsibility to the internet stakeholders. Therefore, among other topics, it's addressed specifically the intermediary liability. Just for summarize, in 1 minute, the Marco Civil of Internet states that internet access and connection providers shall not be held liable for civil damage resulting from content produced by third parties. Therefore, we have an express provision that exclude the liability, the intermediary liability. And the second, my second point that is in the Marco Civil of Internet is that application providers may only be held civil liable for damage resulting from content generated by third parties after specific judicial order. Therefore, what happens here in Brazil is that the application providers are only obligated to put it down a content after a decision from a court. However, currently we have some some laws and discussion in our Congress that are trying to change that, but actually it's only 20 minutes and 20 seconds, sorry, and I cannot explain that. But what I can stress is that here in Brazil, although we have the marks of internet, now we have a discussion going on in our legislative part of the country. So that's it. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Giovanna. Gracias,
Thank
Giovanna.
you, Giovanna. So now let's move to Germán Fajardo from Colombia. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. In the Colombian case, I would say that things are similar to what is happening in the other countries. It is kind of a mixture of what you have been saying. We were able to analyze the responsibility of network providers, of ISPs and content providers as well. And we were able to see that they are somewhat liable for the content that is divulged or spread through their platforms or infrastructure. And the Colombian regulations do set up certain punishments or penalties for sharing information that is illegal, such as child pornography or information that is not, I don't know, legal because it has to do with fiscal aspects and so on and so forth. But what I would like to say from the perspective of Colombia is that, and because I would like to share this because I think we can talk about it, is that how is it that countries in Latin America that have different regulations focused on several levels of intermediaries, how could we implement a particular law, legislation, or regulation in order for the development and the evolution of the internet not to be limited, while also having certain control, at least at the authority level or auditing level, of the content that those intermediaries are sharing. That is, we don't want to limit the development of the internet, but we also want to hold intermediaries liable. So how do we do it? Thank you, Germán. We have now Lorena Donoso from Chile. Hi, good afternoon. I am Lorena Donoso from Chile. In Chile, we carried out a discussion here when we were talking about the commercial trade agreements with the United States were being negotiated, and based on that, the whole topic of the intermediary liability with regards to the creation of content came up based on this on the elimination content. So they have to ensure net neutrality because they needed to ensure freedom of expression, but they need to be liable in as much as if someone notifies them or flags that the content in their system is not legal or hinders society in any way, they have to take it down. So in that sense, they are liable. They are also liable in order to protect data based on the Budapest Agreement. So because of that agreement, an investigation order is created in order to sequester data if the authorities need it. And because of that, I think the regulation that we have does not really equate to that of other countries that provide legal certainty for intermediaries and for users, because I think that in a way we are trying to focus on freedom of expression and the freedom of navigation that people might have in the web. But nowadays, I think that we are working on creating a new constitution as well, and I think that these questions will also come into place in the discussion. Thank you. Thank you, Lorena. Let's go to Mexico, Cynthia. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cynthia Solis. And before getting started, I would like to say that the work of updating the Mexican profile was carried out by myself and Alejandro Pisante. What I would say is that this is a really important moment for the Mexican legislation because Mexican legislators are very much active. So I want to talk about what we already have and then leave a door open for what's to come. So I think Mexico right now is having a lot of work with updating the information. So right now we have the General Telecommunications Act, and there's liability set there. And then as of July 2020, the um, legal author rights are also being regulated. So the question would be whether or not intermediaries can be liable for the infringement of property rights as long as they do not cooperate with the elimination and the takedown of content that is being illegally shared. So that's what the regulation establishes. And in the amendment that was carried out in July 2020, a difference is created between what we understand as internet services providers in the ample sense and in the more specific sense. So on the one hand, we have social networks and search engines that might be co-liable for infringements. And then other legislations and civil and criminal codes that relate to intermediary liability connect to gender violence and other aspects of violence. And that's what I wanted to say in the minutes that I had. Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. So we couldn't have any members of Ecuador here, but I do want to highlight the work that they carried out. So Carlos, you might want to say something about Ecuador? Yes, thank you. Go ahead. Okay, well, thank you for giving me a space even when Mauricio was in charge of the project. Legislation in Ecuador has always been, in a way, assimilated to what is happening in Europe and in other countries, such as the United States. We have regulations that also hold providers liable. But it is hard for us to regulate what they do because most content providers are not in our country. And that is a huge obstacle for us because the providers are not strong enough in the country, and we don't have supranational agreements that allow us to have any impact on these operators. I mean, I remember France when they were able to force eBay to remove Nazi prohibited elements that were being sold in eBay in France and in Europe. So even if the servers and the products came from other countries, they were forced to take down that content. So there was a liability there of those intermediaries. So in a way, liability should be exercised at the level of international agreements that would enable those countries that don't have regulations in place that might actually affect those providers who are outside of their jurisdiction, or because those countries don't have the capacity. Oh, he lost connectivity. I think we can't hear him anymore. I think we've lost Carlos. We cannot hear him anymore. Carlos, can you hear us? Carlos? Am I back? Yes, can you go 20 or 30 seconds back? Because we didn't hear that.
No sé, Diego.
Diego, I'm not sure what's going on. I don't know what's going on with Carlos, but we can't hear him anymore. Yeah. And he didn't write anything in the chat. Yeah. Okay, well, if he does come back, we can ask him to finish his thoughts when we're about to finish, but then let's go back to the moderator. Okay. I think based on all your comments and all the common points that you shared, we want all participants to ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A section that you have available over there in Zoom so that we can have a discussion. There was one thing that you all mentioned that is similar in Colombia, Ecuador, and Bolivia is that there is this need to bring down content, but at the same time to keep up this balance between creation of content and development of the internet and provider control, especially when those providers are outside of the territory. So how do we keep that balance or that net neutrality in the internet in each of our countries? I don't know if maybe one of you wants to talk about this. Yes, I might want to say something if no one else wants to. What I would say is that this is a thing about your countries that is leading to discussion in Europe, as a matter of fact, because in Europe, the principal ruling economic commerce is the principle of the country of origin. So at this stage, the responsibility is to regulate such big platforms to be given to Ireland is too much. So what they're doing is they're setting up agreements between Ireland and the other countries in Europe to coordinate when they need to make a decision about taking down content in big platforms. But another issue is that platforms in certain countries have an interest in interacting with the authorities of the country because they know if things go really, really wrong, they might see that the service is being blocked in that country. So those platforms don't always follow that criteria of country of origin if the market is especially interesting for them. And then another thing that I forgot to mention, and I'm sorry that I didn't mention because I didn't mention Brazil. What I would say is that right now in Brazil, the civil framework is in danger because the Supreme Court of Justice is actually about to analyze the constitutionality of the intermediary liability, and that's something we need to discuss. Thank you, Joan. I don't know if someone else wants to say something about what he was mentioning. Yes, Viviana? Yes, Roberto. Yes, thank you. As Germán was saying, as Carlos said, and as I said too, um, this has to do with the harmonization of regulations. And it's something that I would like for us to have. I would like for us to be able to collaborate between countries to have regional frameworks and regional agreements. It would be ideal for us to have a tradition of collaboration as it happens in Europe, because I think this speeds up the regulatory procedures. And in our case, it's vital to have it, because as we've seen in the survey, in that material that is published and that I encourage you all to check, we will see that only our big brothers, if you will, big countries such as Brazil or Mexico, our big brothers are the only ones who have offices in their countries of those really big intermediaries, and the rest of the countries in the region do not host those big intermediaries. So if we want to regulate them, becomes really complicated, even if we have to exercise our own sovereignty and independently from the fact that we might have specific regulations for them. It might be difficult to pressure them into doing something or into acting. So I think it's a good space for us to discuss how we can set up that reinforcement system and that collaboration system. Thank you, Rihanna. Thank you so much. Roberto, there's a question over there in the chat. Someone is asking, is there neutrality when we are attempting to legislate and moderate content upon the request of a particular party? Can someone answer this? The question is if there's neutrality or what? If is there neutrality when legislation is attempted and moderation of content is attempted upon request of an interested party? I think this has to do with that duty of care, maybe. Well, what I believe is that neutrality is, if you will, an ideal. No platform is fully neutral. From the moment Facebook says, okay, we don't like hate content, they are already in a way not being neutral. So we cannot really demand a platform to be neutral in order to not be liable for anything. That would be surreal, I would say, because it's borderline impossible. Any act of intermediation is not neutral by definition. But even if in Europe there is an ongoing discussion about whether or not we can differentiate active and passive hosts, that distinction is very complex, and I think it can lead to gargantuan discussions. And I think that's not the way to go. I think the way to go is not so much being neutral, but it's about just having a set of mechanisms, such as the ones that I've mentioned, such as having internal appeal processes, having notification processes, having processes where the user is guaranteed a voice. And something else that I want to say, pursuant to this, is that the Latin American model is necessary because the alternative is to have a model that is imposed by someone else because you sign a free commerce treaty with Europe or the United States, and then you need to adopt their regimen and whatever it is that they want you to do. So I think it's really important that at the Latin American and Caribbean level, you have institutions or organizations, or treaties that kind of bring in the political will of the entirety of the countries in the region that set up the Latin American model, because if not, someone will impose this upon you. Mexico, as a matter of fact, is undergoing a very interesting process, but it was actually spurred by this free trade treaty with the United States. So because Mexico is entering into this treaty, they need to adopt their model. And I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but there is this external influence that is setting things in motion. So I think it's important, in order to avoid for things to be imposed upon the countries of the region, and for you to actually create a really holistic agreement between your countries to have your own model. Because if not, when we're trying to create an electronic financial market, you won't be able to actually do it. And right now it's fundamental. And given the fact that we're undergoing a huge crisis at the global level, that would be an issue too. Yes, Joan, I think what you're mentioning is incredibly relevant. And when Roberto and Felix were talking about Bolivia and about the fact that there is no real harmonization, because there's this big difference between the Anglo-Saxon system and the Bolivian system. And because of that, there is a question that connects to that. The question is, what is the road that the region can take in order to organize their legislation, and who is going to help the little countries that don't know how to organize their regulation? Please feel free to answer and participate. Well, Viviana, I would add something to that question. What I would add is asking something to Yuan. When we consider organizations such as ISOC and the ISOC chapters at the regional level, who work to have an open, secure, trustworthy, globally connected, stable internet that is developed sustainably, that promotes no filters and no blocks, what should be our role? And given the fact that we don't have this regulational integration at the regional level, what should be our role in the region to carry out an integration process, at least a regulatory national and supranational regulatory organization? Well, what a complex question, I would say. I think first, it would be interesting for ISOC to have a common position, perhaps, and set up a model regulation, a model framework based on the principles of ISOC. And then another thing that you can do is to find solid partners in this road. So, if we're talking about the Inter-American Chamber of Development is interested in promoting e-commerce in the region, so maybe we can discuss with them having a common framework with regards to intermediary liability. Then you can get help from the Inter-American Chamber of Human Rights as well, because this is a matter of freedom of expression too. So you need to have a well-argumented, solid proposal that is useful and that provides something of a work already done for those governments, and then also find partners in the region that have a certain influence, political influence and political leverage that can help you in that advocacy process, that can set up this and enable you to set up this common framework. I mean, in Latin America, there's nothing like the European Union, so you need to find a way around it if you don't have it. The thing that we have, I would say, is the Andean community that regulates Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and I'm missing out one country, Ecuador. Oh, Ecuador. In that sense, the Andean community has been actually working, and we worked 2 years ago, I think, on the protection of consumer rights who were users of telecommunication services in the framework of a digital economy. A project was carried out that defined that update of the 648 ruling, which concerns these topics. And I think because of political reasons, this is kind of delayed in the bureaucracy of the process. But I don't think we have anything other than that connects our countries in the region. Yes, if I might add to what you were saying, Herman, first, based on what Joan was saying, I would say that it's true that if we don't take action at a regional level, possibly motivated by civil society in our countries, I don't think that external regulations will be imposed. This has already happened, so I know that they have been imposed. As a matter of fact, the data protection regulation created in Europe is being complied with by all the countries, not because we have signed treaties, but just because it's viable in the different sectors. So I think it is urgent and it's important for us to start working at a regional framework. Someone in the chat was talking about, working with Mercosur or UNASUR, and whether or not they are fully articulated or not right now. When the topics have been discussed, we have not been specifically asked to participate. The bureaucracy is also too much of a hassle and too much of a burden. There is, though, the case of roaming in the LACAN countries, and this is a decision that has not been implemented yet because processes are too slow. So we need to find another mechanism that speeds processes up and allows us to generate regional reaction, if you will, to these issues, and to have the specific channels that we need in order for governments to, in lieu of the regional frameworks, to have proper regulations. Yes, based on what you were talking about, the Andean community of roaming, uh, I actually worked for the community in roaming over 10 years ago. I worked in that someone filed that in a drawer. It was called transporter roaming. That was the thing that I was taking a look at 10 years ago. I actually made several proposals, so it's nice to see that it finally worked. But yeah, I mean, you all have different organizations in place, but I think the important thing, as I was saying, is for the entirety of the region to be included, because if not, you have 10 regulatory models in such a transnational area that is e-commerce. You won't get ahead. Thank you so much. There is a question in the Q&A section made by Roberto Zambrana. It says, the declaration of the spectrum as a public service could make more of a demanding liability for intermediaries. Yes, I think we need to differentiate that from intermediary liability to intermediaries who work on content development and administration. Because there's a difference between how they might affect society. Based on the question that you were asking, has to do with actions by other intermediaries, such as those who administer data repositories or information, such as the people who regulate the spectrum. And as a matter of fact, those problems are regulated in our countries in the exercise of their sovereignty, and I don't think there's great issue there. I mean, it calls for other demands, and there are other roadblocks. For example, if we talk about community networks in the authorization of certain spectrum bands, but that really doesn't connect to the intermediary liability that we're talking about right now. Thank you. I don't know if maybe Joanna wants to say something about Brazil, because we know that there's a difference between application and connection providers. So maybe you want to talk about that difference in Brazil, Joanna?
Hi. Marxism of Internet put states two different stakeholders. So first, we have the application providers that are all providers that deal directly to the public. So we have, for example, Google, Facebook, and every kind of party that strictly relates to the public. So when we actually talk about liability, mostly we are talking about this kind of providers. The second place, we have the servers and telecommunication stakeholders that are not liable as the application providers. So another thing that I would like to stress is that Marx review has two exclusion of liabilities. So I don't remember exactly who mentioned that, but also we have the copyright infringements that are one of the exceptions for this kind of regime. So every kind of matter differs of copyright law can be excluded or deleted by the internet providers, application providers. Sorry. So the second exception is the disclosure of any kind of image, videos, and other materials that are can be like revenge porn or child image and everything. So these are the two exceptions that we have to the notice and takedown approach.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Over here, we also have a question here in the chat by Alejandro Martinez. How is the role that operators need to take with regards to proposals such as the one of Mexico, where it has been proposed to block those who do not pay taxes, like VAT taxes, or who do not hold taxes to work products. Okay, well, so these intermediary platforms need to withhold taxes, and they need to establish blocks for taxes. So what happens is that we are trying to amend the regulations. So the regulations attempt in a way to harden fiscal activities. So in as much as providers are aligned with those fiscal requirements, everything will be fine. So if we're talking about Mercado Libre, or Amazon, they need to withhold taxes, VAT taxes, to those who are selling their products in those platforms. And in that sense, I don't think that. I mean, I still think that this is intermediary liability, but this is just in the event that they don't actually withhold the VAT taxes from the people that are using the platform. So I don't see a conflict here. Lorena, your microphone is on. Do you want to say something? Yes, in Chile, we will also be talking about the intermediary liability with regards to tax withholding. So again, if those taxes are not withheld, then there might be a problem. But if not, the end user won't have any issue with it. So this is not necessarily connected to content. Now, with regards to the spectrum in particular, the planification and the adjudication of the spectrum does not really connect to intermediary liability either, but it has to do with providers of telecommunication infrastructure. So that's what I wanted to say about what you were talking about. Maybe I can add something too with regards to what's happening in Bolivia. Yes. Yes. Going back to what you were all mentioning, I think it's also important to consider the self-regulation phenomenon that has happened around the internet, both in both in platforms such as social networks and in other elements of the internet too. And in the case of Olivia, through several congressmen and women, has attempted in a very dangerous way to negatively regulate. And I would say that it's important to say that this is negative regulation. They have negatively attempted to regulate on 3 or 4 occasions to regulate social networks with new um, digital crimes. And also, based on what you were commenting about taxing, there has been an attempt to start taxing those providers in order to even burden those end users with taxes for going against the net neutrality principle. Going back to a topic that I think leads us into a topic, a very long discussion, of course. But I do want to say that there have been attempts in the country that might lead to the responsibility of policymakers who should not stop thinking about the fact that regulation should be positive and not go against users. And in Bolivia, there have been attempts to regulate e-commerce, and 60% of commerce in Bolivia is irregular, and 1 out of 10 purchases in Bolivia are not are conducted face to face. So most of the work that is done virtually. Thank you, Fabian. I think Juan needs to leave, so maybe we can give him a couple of minutes to wrap this up. Yes, thank you. This has been a really interesting conversation. I hope that we can continue talking about this later on, because I think that there are many topics for us to discuss, but I do want to leave you with 2 remarks. First, when we talk about intermediary liability, we're not talking in this legal void. So if you don't have any specific regulations for that, general liability regulations will be applied. In many of the cases, those regulations don't really adapt to the things that happen on the internet. So a lot of the times, it's not about not having a regulation, but about not having specific regulation or regulation that is positive and necessarily adapts to the internet. And then the second thing that I want to insist on is that when we talk about the World Intermediary Liability Map, Diego and I will be working on how the different chapters can contribute to the initiative of the map if you're interested in doing it as one of the possibilities for you to collaborate together. So with that, I do want to thank you for providing me with the opportunity of sharing a couple of comments and disrupt your private meeting in order to share at least what I feel about these matters. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juan. Okay, so this is the last bit of our discussion. I do want to ask all participants. I'm going to let Alejandra Stoll share a couple of comments because she raised her hand. I don't know if you want to say something, Alejandra. I think Alejandra got shy. Okay. I just got another question. I don't know, maybe Alejandra is having issues connecting. No, I think it was a mistake. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, that's fine, Alejandra, don't worry. So let's give each of you a minute so that you can share some final comments. Anything that you want to share, that's the time for you to do it. You have a minute. Without any particular order, any of you can get started. In my case, I just want to say that I feel it's important for us to have coherent legal frameworks around the region because that allows us to be certain about what we're doing and for us to protect the freedom of speech of users and also for us to be efficient in the persecution of delinquent activities. So I think we need to continue talking together about this for us to have a map, for us to have common points. In order to collaborate, I think that's the most relevant thing that we should take from this. And I appreciate that you had the initiative to start this discussion. So let's continue working on this. Yes, that's great, Lorena. Thank you. Yes, if I may. Well, I think that even though it is true that what John was saying works, I would say that the initiatives to create this co-liability for intermediaries are real, and they have been existing in existence for many years in Mexico. And I think that the civil society in Mexico many a times does not participate in voting or discussions. That was actually the case now because the legislation process was conducted on a Saturday, so civil society couldn't participate. So that's one thing. But then another thing is that I think that we need to have regulations that adapt to us more. But I think we do need to understand that we belong to an international um, space and that everything that happens on the internet is ruled by international principles and trends. So we need to see what's happening in Mexico. We do have cybersecurity initiatives too that intend to monitor activity, and we will try to monitor that up close so that they don't imply a violation and infringement of human rights. And we want to have an update session as well with you guys later on. Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. Anyone else would like to perhaps say something? Well, yes, I'll take this minute to call for union, call all chapters to get together, work together for common interests. And I think that this is a common interest for us, regardless of how much our regulations and legislations might be divergent. I think it is very unlikely that we will be able to have only one single regulation at the regional level. I think Lorena was trying to indicate that, I assume. But I think that we do need to find a space so that in our countries, through our chapters and our ISOC chapters, we might start debating this and actually bring these topics and these matters up to authorities. And in those cases where we have support, we might actually connect to big brothers in the European Union and get their help. Thank you. Can I go?
Adelante, Roberto.
Sure, go, Roberto. I would say that there is a latent risk in the country, in our country, and in many other countries, which is that in small countries such as ours, it is easier to establish a local regulation that imposes something upon the intermediary who is there in the country and who might be fully rated, um, rather than go against someone that is outside the country. So many a times, what we are trying to do is to regulate content that is not always legitimate. So many times, the way in which content is regulated goes against freedom of expression. So I think that there is a latent risk in regulating intermediary liability, especially when we're talking about the real intermediary that needs to be regulated is out of our radar because they're not in our countries. So I wouldn't say that we need to find a single regulation for the entire region just for the sake of it, because that won't necessarily mean that we will all have Facebook and Google and Twitter providing services in the countries of the region. I mean, we're talking about a big operator, a monster of an operator, if you will, who is somewhere other in the world, and we will have no ability to connect to control them because they are not in our region. So I do join in that call to action and call to union so that we might collaborate together here. Thank you. Thank you.
¿Algún otro participante?
Do any other of the speakers want to participate? Yes. Going back to Bolivia before we wrap this up. Uh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Carlos. You've had your hand up so long. Go ahead, Carlos.
Adelante.
Go ahead, Carlos. This is. I'm sorry, Carlos. I didn't know it was you. Tell us. I've been listening to everyone, but I'm sorry you guys couldn't hear me. What I would say essentially is that the only option for us to really work on this, because out of political topics, I think the best way for us to do this is for us to create commercial agreements with the countries where the big content providers are located. And in that sense, with regard to regulation and jurisdiction, we can then have treaties with them. If we don't, it will be impossible for us to go against those providers. And it's also impossible for us to have an international organization, because this is what happens with Interpol. We know that there are court orders. There's these red notices for certain citizens called for Interpol, and Interpol decides what is what. And the same thing will happen with providers. So they will only be able to say whether or not something is legal or not depending on internal jurisprudence, but based on a particular criteria.
No sé si...
I don't know if anyone else wants to say something. Fabian? Yes, thank you. Can I say, I just want to say that when we entered into the Budapest Agreement, we were really able to see fundamental changes in Chile. So based on that moment, we really saw relevant changes. So legal interventions as well uh, changed, and they were provided fundamental guarantees because of the Budapest Agreement.
Perfecto. Muchísimas
Thank
gracias,
you.
Lorena.
Thank you, Lorena.
Sí, Fabián.
Fabian, go. Well, just to wrap it up, I think that there's something that I always remember at the legal level, and that's as Tacitus would always say, the more laws we have, the more corrupt the state. And I think that that's something that we might need to remember. Maybe having regulation after regulation after regulation might not be necessary, but we should probably make people be more literate in the laws that we already have and improve those that we already have rather
Muchísimas
than
gracias,
create more.
Fabián.
Thank you very much,
Yo
Fabian.
creo que como puntos finales,
Well, I think that
todas las participaciones,
as a
primero
summary of all your
una
comments,
coordinación
what we would
entre
say is that there's a
jurisdicciones
need for us to
nacionales.
have
Pero no
holistic
sé si ahora Diego
regulation, and
quiere
maybe
cerrar.
Diego wants to close this
Primero
session.
quería saber si,
Yes, first I want to know
el
if,
perfil de
as
Venezuela,
the author of the Venezuela
Venezuela,
profile,
algo
you would like to
con
say something
que
too?
quedamos aquí hasta este punto,
Because
para
if
poder
we've gotten all the
pasar
way
a la siguiente.
here, we might listen to you too.
Sí, bueno, como dije en un inicio, yo creo
Well,
que
as I said at
el,
first,
el aspecto venezolano
the
está
Venezuelan
por la
case is very
situación
limited, I
electoral
think,
que
because of the
está viviendo el país.
political and economic
Existen
situation of the
restricciones que,
country.
como comentaba ya
We have
Lorena,
regulations, as Jan was saying, that are
pero no existe en sí una
particularly
responsabilización
applied
por
to
parte de la
intermediaries, but there
población
are no
en función
legislative
de lo que
or
significa la
regulatory
responsabilidad.
regulations
Estas
for the
situaciones
intermediary
hacen
liability.
algo que
So for
Venezuela
us,
puede
having in
desarrollar
Venezuela,
un
for having
procedimiento
a single
único
regulation for the entire region
y
might be
agradecería mucho
beneficial. And I would
esfuerzo
very
y
much
decisión en
uh,
desarrollar
be
esta
thankful for
legislación
efforts in the region to
necesaria
create a
debido
legislatory
a que Venezuela
effort,
no se puede aplicar.
because nowadays,
Yo creo que
really, we cannot apply those efforts in
está.
Venezuela. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
Vale, perfecto. Así que
Thank you. Great.
ahora asumo el papel de
So
summary,
now I take on the role of summarizer.
cuando todo este
First, I
inicio
would say that
de
once this
intermediarios
entire issue
los
of
proveedores hacían básicamente
intermediary
papeles para
liability
liberar
first
las
came to
cuentas
life,
de
providers
nuestros
were just
clientes.
sending packages from
Por lo
end to
tanto,
end in the
los
network.
mecanismos de
So in
responsabilidad
those times,
básicamente
regulatory
tenían que ver con acciones,
liability
contenidos
regimes
y
had to do with
actividades de
actions,
terceros.
contents, and
Más nos estamos
activities
viendo
by
aquí
third
como un
parties.
intermediario
And the more things change, the more we realize that those providers that we depend upon are taking actions upon themselves. So for us in internet society, it is necessary to keep this idea that infrastructure providers and those who do that job of sending packages from one end to another, even if they are infrastructure providers or those providers that Roberto was mentioning, who are the intermediaries in our country that lead the way to the great platforms and that connect those great platforms to us, need to be somehow protected from any liability for the actions of individual or corporate users. The big issue that we find here, though, in that space is that it is very easy for authorities to look at those intermediaries and try to block content or remove content, block the access in a way that is not proportional with the situation and that creates prejudice for a multitude of users, be them individual users, be them the companies of our countries or our own governments. So the challenge that lays ahead is enormous. We need to be able to separate the responsibility for the actions of third parties and the responsibility for our own actions as providers. And then at the same time, we need to be able to identify which are the providers in our countries that are simply acting as an access leading to bigger providers. And that's, I think, the main point of our discussion. And then the second point is that I am happy in two ways. First, I am happy because of the survey that many of you helped us produce. But I'm also happy because of this session that we were able to have. I think it impressed the people who participated in the Stanford MAPA. The first thing we did in February was indicate which were the experts who were working and who might help maintain that map and work on that map. The second thing is that we felt that we were responsible for having new ongoing processes and activities, as well as a set of actions in this alliance that we have as members of staff and the community that help us move forward with changes and developments of public policies and regulations in our regions based on the models that you are proposing, regional models, Latin American and Caribbean models. And someone in the chat said that the Latin American approach has to do with South America. And be sure to know that in internet society, we are thinking of the entirety of a LAC and not just Latin America. So please help us share information, share national profiles with us so that we can grow this profile. And lastly, answer the trivia for your session so that you can get your points and you can make Nancy happy with the results of the session. For me, it was an honor not just to be here with all of you today, Roberto, Germán, Cynthia, Lorena, Giovanna, Flavio, Alejandro, Viviana mainly, who did an amazing work as a moderator, but to have been working with all of you since February, to continue be able to working with you, but also with members who are here as attendees in a group of experts on intermediary liability. So thank you very much for your support. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you for staying over time, over half an hour more than we were here today. Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Bye, everyone.